My name is James Hogbin. I'm the CEO of Fingerprint Supervision. Welcome to another compliance catch-up where we talk about compliance. Today, absolutely honoured to be introducing Jay Biondo, who has basically defined market supervision as it exists for TT Score, although I'm sure Morgan will be angry with me saying that. So welcome, Jay.
Hello, James. Very happy to be here.
So, of all of the people I deal with, you have one of the most grown-up backstories. Why don't you let us know how you got to be where you are today?
Sure, absolutely. My career started, I went to law school here in Chicago. I initially was a regulator at NYSE ARCA in Chicago and eventually at FINRA for a few years. Then I went into the business side of the industry and was a compliance officer and a chief compliance officer at a couple of proprietary trading firms here in Chicago. And then lo and behold, a startup company formed here and reached out to me one day looking for a domain expert. The concept of the company was going to be developing machine learning models for trade surveillance. And the name of the company was Norensic, and it sounded very appealing to me at that time, having had to, throughout the course of the previous years as a regulator and a CCO, trying to design and tune all of these various different trade surveillance models, trying to figure out a way to use some more advanced technology to design these models sounded very appealing to me. And I joined the startup. And then Trading Technologies acquired that startup company back in 2017, and I've been continuing to work on the trade surveillance system. It was originally TT Score, and now it is TT Trade Surveillance, so still working on it up to this day.
And with your background as a regulator and a chief compliance officer, talk to me about supervision. Obviously, you've told people and looked at people doing it, you've prosecuted on the back of it, you've been responsible for it. What does good supervision, good surveillance look like for you?
Yes. So I think, from a regulatory standpoint, the way I would look at it is, do they have a set of written supervisory procedures that are, up to the standards we would expect? I mean, reasonableness is a general standard, but we want to make sure that if you are, if you're trading certain products or you're engaging in certain operations, that you have a set of written supervisory procedures that would achieve compliance with those various different operations. But then more importantly, not only do you have the procedures, you're actually following them, and that you can actually evidence that you are following them. And I think then that translates over to the surveillance side, the trade surveillance side, and being almost, more of a on the vendor side of things and saying, well, our system, you can take our system and easily put the system into your processes and embed them into your written supervisory procedures. So you can very easily evidence on our system, as you should with any system you're using, you can evidence that you are following your procedures, documenting your reviews, and then can provide that to the regulators when they come knocking on your door.
And I think it's fair to say TT Score has, TT.
That's okay.
I apologize. Not up with the branding. It's got a phenomenally clever way of doing what it does. Why don't you explain a little bit about it? Because it's super clever.
Sure. So the machine learning, I like to think of it as a hybrid system, and we use this combination of machine learning models specifically for spoofing detection. But then we also have what we call configurable models, where the user can themselves. So we kind of give them this hybrid approach where I feel like it's the best of both worlds, where we will give you a machine learning model that's going to identify patterns of manipulation without you having to worry about whether or not you're tuning your parameters properly. So it's almost like an out-of-the-box intelligence, and it's very general in the sense that it's asset class agnostic. It doesn't need to be tuned. It's going to look for those patterns, and then not only will it identify the patterns, it'll then score them for you on a scale from 0 to 100 and identify where the regulatory risk lies. Okay, so it's going to do that for you automatically. But then if you want to have more control over that for spoofing or for other areas of manipulation, you also have the configurable models where you can tune those parameters specifically to your business and tailor them to your needs. So you get that combination of the out-of-the-box intelligence, machine learning technology, powerful pattern detection capabilities, but then also more hands-on capabilities as well.
And in a business, who do you find gets most value out of the system? Is it trading risk, trading compliance, general compliance, traders themselves? How wide does it go within the organization that you deal with?
Yeah, I would say most of the time, the primary use case is the compliance officers. Okay, so you're looking at a chief compliance officer and their team of compliance analysts. They are using our system to identify the patterns of activity and then leveraging the scoring system to maximize their efficiency. And we give like various different visual tools that use that scoring system to say, we can pinpoint pockets of regulatory risk within your trading activity that would, we can do that instantly. We can do that very quickly. Other systems, legacy systems that are out there, you're going to be going through maybe hundreds, if not maybe thousands of false positive alerts to identify what we are finding for you almost instantaneously through the way that we approach trade surveillance. So that is the big benefit for the compliance officers. We do have some risk people, I wouldn't say that that's the only use case. Risk professionals can certainly use the tool as well. And then we do have some individual traders who use us to monitor their own trading activity, but those are definitely secondary, use cases.
And explain to the viewers pattern recognition in reduction for false positives. Obviously, I'm reasonably well known for calling out AI as a bunch of rubbish if statements that mean nothing. However, I'm a big buyer of deterministic processes, pattern matching, anomaly detection, all of that sort of stuff, as a seriously intelligent way of finding risk and uncovered information. Talk to me about how you're using AI, i.e. pattern recognition, and why that's better than a filtering process or whatever else.
Right. So, machine learning is a subcategory of AI, but I do choose to specifically point out that it is machine learning and not generative AI, the way that we approach this. Because when it comes to compliance, you have to have a level of explainability, and machine learning can afford that for you, right? And so we designed everything in a way where it can be explainable to a regulator if they ask questions. And what I mean by that is we're using random forest, and we're only doing supervised learning. Okay, it's not unsupervised. It's not a black box. So that was a design decision we made early on. Okay, but now what we took it from there. Once we had that framework in place, what we did was we took regulatory case data from pilot customers, and we used that data to train the machine learning model to recognize what the optimal set of mathematical vectors are in spoofing patterns. Okay, and so this was regulatory case data. We knew it had drawn regulatory attention, so therefore it was essentially what we would call positively labeled, and we could extract those mathematical vectors. We call them features. So we would extract the optimal set of features and then basically use that set of features to identify spoofing patterns. Okay. And that went through a lot of various different testing and domain expertise to make sure the model was accurate. Okay. Mm-hmm. Now you can identify the patterns with those features, and the benefit there, one of the benefits, is that the users don't have to calibrate the parameters themselves. Okay. Mm-hmm. Because everything is going to be measured in mathematical similarity to the features in that regulatory case data. Okay.
How do you prevent overfitting in that regard? Did you have backtest data? So it's like algo trading, right? You got your backtest data, and then you got some untouched data, and you test one against the other. How do you prevent it from being too specific and looking for too close of a pattern?
Yeah. So part of that is data science techniques like precision recall curves, where you want to make sure that it's not, 100% precise, essentially, because then you would only be identifying patterns that you've trained on. We didn't want that. Okay. Because then you're essentially kind of just creating
It's a
another
filter again.
traditional parameter-based model. So we leave, I guess you could call it like, a fuzzy. It's a little fuzzy. It's a little, less. It's not going to be as precise as a 100% recall. And and through that, we don't retrain that often, because at a certain point you get diminished returns with that, because you do have the risk of overfitting the algorithm. We want it to be elastic. We want the elasticity of the machine learning, because you can catch not only what you trained on, but you can catch what you haven't trained on. It will still give you that same type of a pattern detection, and you may find something that you had not ever encountered in the past, which we did early on, and we got to name a form of spoofing named vacuuming, and we were the first ones to identify that. So
how cool.
Yeah.
And so when you're creating these models, you've got the patterns from the investigations. Do you go out to your trading community and say, does this look right? Does this look wrong? How are you looking at the data and going, yeah, no, yeah, with the reinforcement learning? How's that?
So typically that's all done in-house. Okay, so that's through mostly the domain experts we have on staff, like myself, former regulators, former chief compliance officers. Then we also can look at published regulatory cases. Okay, and so when the regulator might put something out that's extensive, which is not all that common, but they will put out certain things. Like I think it was like the 3Red case years ago. There was like 100-page, 150-page, document that came along with that they published, and you were able to then take that and say, oh, okay, well, let's put some of this, maybe some fake trade data in there and see how our model would handle that. So that's another way. But then we can take customer feedback too, and we do.
Would you say that you guys, Chicago futures trading, up there with it, leading edge stuff, is that market similar to European equities or the power OTC network across Europe, or whatever it happens to be? Do you see the same patterns echoing through different markets, or is it it's equities, that's a different thing?
I definitely think there are differences. I do think that the futures world, because it's so much more institutional, has kind of a different approach there. TT, for example, we're an institutional trading platform. So we're looking at, and then there's always been this kind of level of, futures traders are treated a little bit differently because than the retail equities people are, right? Because the institutional traders are supposed to know the rules. Like they're supposed to be like, hey, you know what I mean? I shouldn't be spoofing Dodd-Frank, and everybody's telling me this is what spoofing is, and I can't do it. Yeah. Right? So they're they're held to a certain standard. Equities traders, especially in retail, you're probably like, oh, well, we can identify these various different forms of manipulation, but they may lack that requisite level of intent or knowledge of whether or not they're actually violating any rules. So there is a difference there.
And in terms of the US, where there's loads of different exchanges, you can get prices quoted onto exchanges, etc., etc. When you come to Europe, and there's the FTSE, there are some other exchanges, but they're minor. Or you go over to Singapore or wherever, there's just one exchange.
Yeah.
Do you find the same patterns in a unitary exchange world as you do in a multiple exchange world, or are you tracking into dark pools and things like that as well?
So it's certain forms of manipulation definitely lend themselves to particular markets. There's no doubt about that. Like, so for futures, the way that I've seen it is, a single limit order book, you can see like momentum ignition or a spoofing or some of those things that you could see that how that was done and why they did it that way. And it's very clear to see when you look at the activity in the order book, how it unfolded. That's not necessarily the case with other markets or other asset classes like dark pools. spoofing isn't probably going to be that big of an issue or identifiable, because you can't use those large spoof orders to influence other market participants in there necessarily. And because it's essentially kind of dark, right? And so you're not going to be able to use that concept of book pressure with large orders to influence other market participants as you might in a futures market. And then, yes, I think that there's just a great difference in the types of manipulation between the asset classes. And in equities, you're looking at things like reg show. That's not something you're really concerned about in futures, right? So regulation show is a completely set of different requirements for that asset class that's specific to that.
And you guys work for the firms that are doing the trading. On the other side, does the regulator have a really big one that looks at everybody and goes, aha, we can see this sort of thing? So effectively, you're keeping the firm safe and the regulator's trying to keep the whole thing safe. There is a difference there, or not?
Yeah, there's multiple layers. So you have the exchanges, who are SROs, and they do have systems, be it things they've built in-house or in things they're buying from a vendor, and they're monitoring everybody. And then below them, you have the clearing firms, and they're also monitoring everybody who they're clearing, because that's a responsibility they have. Then below that, that's where the trading firms really are. But yes, so they'll have to answer to the SROs, the clearing firms, and also the federal regulators as well. Not every federal regulator has their own system. Sometimes they just kind of piggyback off of the SROs, but some of them do.
Mm-hmm. And you've got an incredibly clever cross-market thing, which is unique, isn't it? So you can actually track the implications of order book pressure in one market on trading in another. Talk about that, because that is super. Again, I'll put that is super clever. ... My question. So talk about the cross-market stuff.
So I think the beginning of the concept kind of came from another tool within the TT trading platform that a lot of people use called AutoSpreader, where you can create user-created spreads. So we knew, okay, well, if you can create a multi-product instrument, single instrument with multiple products, well, why don't we try doing that with surveillance? So what you can do is input various different products into our interface. And then when we process the data, we will combine those products into a single synthetic instrument and look for manipulation across those products. Okay. And so that is all automated. The creation of the synthetic instruments is essentially, it's automated and takes, I'm not aware of any other tool out there that actually does that and then looks for those same types of features of manipulation that our normal spoofing model does, essentially. So.
And in terms of, we've talked about the theoretical models. You have to make it live for compliance people who, by their very nature, aren't traders. How do you make sure that your UI is usable by humans, right? Because you look at it, order book levels and trades and fills and things that hang around in the order book and then cancel themselves out, really complicated. And a compliance officer has to identify wrongdoing. How do you synthesize and sieve that all away so the compliance officer can do something rather than just look at graphs all day?
It's not easy. What we use like a combination of tools, I would say. So we will give like statistical overviews of things, but that's just kind of like I guess it kind of like a guide. It like helps the compliance officer understand what was happening. But then what we do in addition to the stats is we give visuals, which there are charts. Definitely charts can help. But I think that the most powerful visual is that we use a replica of the TT trading ladder. Okay. And the TT trading ladder is what put trading technologies on the map 30 years ago. So from a futures trading standpoint, it's pretty well known in the industry these days. Mm-hmm. Okay. So, and then even if you haven't seen it before as a compliance officer, it's very intuitive. And what it does is it will put your trader's activity into the context of the market on the same ladder that the trader was using. at that time during the trading. And therefore, we're putting you into the shoes of the trader so you can then see, okay, well, I can kind of see how the decision-making process went here, or at least you can ask the trader, why were you making these decisions? And ultimately determine what their intent was at the time of that activity.
And so we've just had a question from, my name isn't good, and I apologize if I butcher this, Yahya Benzari, which is a sort of runs into this. You've got the compliance officer over here, whose job it is to monitor, surveil, question, be suspicious. We've got some AI pattern recognition over here, and we've got a UI in the middle. To the question, how do you assure the compliance officer and allow the compliance officer to attest to the AI, the pattern recognition, the machine learning? How is that surfaced to the compliance officer?
Yeah, generally it's through documentation of how the model works. And so we have extensive documentation about how we train the model, how we identified the mathematical vectors, those features that we determined were the most optimal ones. And then also we give a extensive user training. So it's like a combination of this documentation that runs through and kind of lays everything bare about the process, but then also the user training. And that's a big part of what I do, is we will go through alerts during the initial onboarding process and sometimes continually throughout the time of them being a customer. And we will look at that and we will say, okay, well, here is this activity. We can see that there was something like an imbalanced state. Okay, that's something the model's going to look for, is imbalances, and then also imbalanced fills. Okay, so like, was the trader using large orders to get filled on small orders? And after using it for a while, you start to become, as a user, you start to say, oh, now I understand exactly what it is that this model's looking for. And if a regulator comes and asks me about it, if I can explain it verbally, but then I also have the documentation to back me up on that as well. And then essentially you provide it to the regulator. The regulators themselves have become sophisticated enough now where they generally do understand exactly what it is that you're talking about. That was not always the case. That's been kind of the timeline of the adoption of these advanced technologies in surveillance systems that the regulators have been educating themselves. And the better that has gotten, the easier it has become to use machine learning in things like trade surveillance.
And you mentioned the random forest model for machine learning. I think the second part of the question is, which types of AI models are best suited to achieve that level of transparency? Obviously, you guys use random forest. Are there others? Why did you select that one over other ones? Is that something we need to get a tech nerd involved in the call on? I don't know.
So the random forest, I wasn't a part of that decision 7, 8 years ago, but I can tell you the reason why I like it from my perspective, that's not a data science perspective, is that essentially that there are 32 mathematical vectors on your random forest decision tree. Okay. And we can say to the regulator, here are the 32 mathematical vectors. Okay. And if you really wanted to, you could actually show how each one of those vectors calculated over your data. So you actually can show those calculations if the regulator did want to dive that deep into it. Now, that being said, it's not as easy as saying, here's my parameter chain of if this, then this, then this, then this, that I have set myself, right? And you can still do that in our system if you so choose. But the problem is that if you want to do that, you're going to be doing it across thousands of different products with different liquidity profiles that shift during different times of the trading day across all the asset classes that you're trading. Okay, so what we're saying is you might not have the same level of explainability up to the utmost level with our model. However, it's still very explainable and can cover its liquidity asset class agnostic and liquidity profile neutral. So we are removing all of that work for you. We're doing that with the model instead of you having to do all of that parameter calibration yourself. So you make the decision. Would you prefer to use this and have to explain a little bit about machine learning? Or would you rather have to do all that parameter calibration? And it's really the decision that the compliance officer has to make.
And so the other concept that you guys have that is, again, super clever is the idea of clustering. so that you're not taking an entire day. You're looking at a bit of the market that looks similar to other bits of the market, shoving it into a cluster that may be bigger, maybe smaller, maybe wider, maybe deeper, and analyzing that. Talk a little bit about how that works. So I think that's, again, a really neat
it is
way of doing things.
That ties in nicely to what we were just talking about with the random forest, is the clustering algorithms, because if you're tuning your parameters, the regulators are going to ask questions about that as well. And you have to explain that as well. And one of those things is time windows. Okay. Rolling time windows. If you're setting those parameters yourself, how did you determine those were the right time windows? It could be a minute. It could be an hour. It could be a day. Right. And you have to have the justification of why you chose those rolling time windows to identify that manipulation. So again, we took that away from the responsibility of the user and instead use a clustering algorithm that is based upon the trader's behavior. Okay. So as the trader starts to become active, a cluster begins to form, and that cluster will continue to get longer and longer and longer as the trader remains active. And then after the trader ceases trading for a period of time, the cluster ends. Then we can run the machine learning algorithm over that cluster of data we just created. Okay. So it's all based upon their behavior and is more effective, therefore, at capturing what was their intent instead of just trying to choose random rolling time windows of whether or not you may even actually be able to detect the behavior you're looking for.
And so in terms of that, if you, just as a thought experiment, if you ran it over different clusters, would you get different results, or is the pattern stronger than the cluster, or the cluster stronger than the pattern? Which is the
so you can get different results. You can. So like, for example, one way that we've done experimented with that and found enhancements to that is with automated trading. So with like manual trading, for example, the trader is not going to be active 24/7 in microseconds. You know what I mean? Like their activity, their pattern is going to be different because they're click trade. So it's going to be a little bit more slow, and there's going to be larger gaps in the activity just based upon the nature of that trading activity. Now, with algorithmic trading, what you can do, that's faster and it's contiguous. So you don't want clusters that are going to be full of a million workflow events that span over the time, hours. You're never going to be able to find the manipulation in there, right? You're never going to be able to. So what we do is we speed up that algorithm, speed up the clustering algorithm to better handle the nature of that trading. And we look for smaller breaks to cut off the clusters, to keep the clusters within a reasonable duration. That way, the machine learning is still very effective at finding those patterns and then making them very clear for the compliance officer to identify where those issues may lie within that activity.
And the compliance officer themselves obviously live within, as you said, a policy framework that gets looked at possibly annually, but certainly periodically. Their responsibility is to have proportionate and appropriate supervision.
Yeah.
How do you, as a vendor, make sure that they're doing an appropriate and the correct level of, because they bought your system and then they're going to go, well, keep it up to date. And you're like, Is it appropriate? No. How do you ensure those two?
Yeah, so I would say, everything that we do is always versioned. Everything that we do is auditable. Okay. So first of all, we'll take care of our customer in that sense that they always have access to whatever questions they're being asked, the answers to the questions they're being asked within the system itself. So they can show, here's the version of the software I was on. Here's all the things that were being offered in the version at that time. And then also here's all our review notes and all the reports and everything else we were doing. It's all in there. We're going to save it in a forever audit trail. We're never dropping anything off. It's always accessible to them for as long as they're a customer. Okay. So we really help them with that. Then it is, in my opinion, a lot of it is customer support. Okay. And I don't, it's not just like fixing bugs. That's important, but it's also more of like I guess you could say like an account management type of approach where our customers always have access to somebody like myself or a couple of my other colleagues. and they can always reach out to us directly. We will have meetings with them. We can teach them how to use the system very effectively. We don't just take a manual and throw it over a fence and say, best of luck to you. Good luck. Here's, see you and when it's time to renew your contract. That's not the way we handle things. And I feel like it has been that customer support that has really been a differentiator for us. The software is fantastic, but then you add in that customer support, and that has been a huge driver of our customer adoption over the last 5 years.
And TT's strategy recently has been to get really heavily into the pre-trade compliance area, just in general, with the able noser and total cost analytics and that sort of thing. Obviously, compliance is a really broad church, and we at Fingerprint do communication supervision. How does the TT platform fit into that? And what are your opinions on what other bits and pieces of supervision a good compliance system looks like?
Yeah, the beauty of being an integrated component of a trading platform is that we already collect a lot of, anything that's going on futures markets by the people using the TT platform. All the trading's already collected, so we can onboard people instantaneously. And then we're also collecting market data, so we can use that market data for all these great visuals and other things inside the models themselves to create precise results. So that being a part of this like TT ecosystem for us is tremendously advantageous. And then also people that are using, I think you're exactly, hitting on it. The platform, the fact that you can have all of your tools from trading to algo development to risk to pre-trade risk controls and surveillance, all on a single platform. You have a single login, you get access to all of these tools. We're all just right on a toolbar, and you can shift from one thing to another. It's that multi kind of application platform that I think has really been a tremendous advantage for us as TT has gone in that direction over time.
And in terms of the compliance mix, you're a compliance officer, you've got your coffee, you're sat there, you're looking at the trading, you're looking at the comms, you're looking at the PA dealing, you're looking and reviewing your customer complaints line and all the rest of it. You've been a previous regulator. Where, as a regulator, is the juice at the moment? Where are they focusing in that range of jobs that a compliance person has to do?
Yeah, and I think you pointed out something too with the comms, like that's one of the beauties of the platform as well, is we can always add more applications too, right? And that could be something like e-coms. And then you're a compliance officer and now you have your trading and your e-coms, right? That would be extraordinarily convenient for people and easy to explain to the regulators that you have a single system that looks at all these things, okay? And then in addition to that, you could, in theory, combine the electronic communications or the e-coms and v-coms with the trade surveillance, which becomes possible when it's all inside the same platform. And you have your trading, you have your risk, you have your surveillance with e-coms and v-coms, creating a complete platform and single solution for a compliance officer. And then everything's all inside that system with a case management system as well, where you can then evidence all of the reviews that you're doing and everything in a single system. That I think is the vision for the future. I think the people who can provide all of those tools in a single, you'll cut all the way across from the business side to the back office, and you will have, I think, an extremely attractive offering out there for people.
And as an ex-regulator, did you prosecute or censure, or I'm not quite sure what US regulators do, turn up in wind cheaters and arrest people. Did you ever do that on trading signals alone, or did you always rely on other records, screenshots, phone calls, Bloomberg chats? How did you build a case when you were building a case?
So during my regulatory days, what we did in my department was based solely on the trading behavior itself. Okay, so we were designing surveillances, we were finding alerts, we were analyzing the alerts, putting together a case statistically
Mm-hmm.
and based upon that trading, and then recommending it to the federal authorities, who would then take that information and start a larger, broader investigation, which would include things like the e-coms and the voice and
Mm-hmm.
all those other things. So we were just kind of teeing it up, saying, look, this is really very, it's very likely that, this is manipulation just based upon the statistical evidence that's being provided. But now go look for that smoking gun in that other evidence to tie it all together and bring an enforcement case. Okay, so that was the way that. Now, when I was a chief compliance officer, I had to do all of that myself internally. So I was just trying to, use my surveillance alerts to identify the patterns. Then I'd have to go into my, e-coms, system, which was separate. And I'd have to go search for all the e-coms or the voice records and try to then put it all together myself so that I could then go to the trader and say, let's have a really difficult conversation right now about exactly what I'm seeing here, and then take the necessary corrective action after that.
How often did the traders face you down and go, it's not what you think, Jay, it's something else? And how often did you go, I've got this email, clearly you arranged this, or Bloomberg, or actually probably in your day, AOL Messenger or something. Then you go, we've done it, look.
Yeah, there were a couple of times where I would say 9 times out of 10, they actually had an explanation. Whether or not that explanation was still a violation of a rule or not is a different matter. But they would say, look, I did this, this, and this because of this. Here's everything around it. And I would have to say, okay, well, I understand, what you were thinking at that time and how that all unfolded. So it seems like you didn't intentionally do something nefarious, right? You may have still crossed the line, but it wasn't intentional manipulation or intentional bad acts. Now, there were still a couple of times, though, where you would come to them with that evidence and say, here's the trades. Here's you telling your fellow desk person to put the spoof orders in at this time. There's no way around this.
Yeah.
That's it.
How much of market manipulation would you say is just inept trading, and how much is deliberate?
Yeah, I would say the vast percentage of it is inadvertent. And it's
no less illegal. I understand that, but
right. It could be confusion about rules. It could be, market conditions.
Mm-hmm.
Where maybe things were going against the trader and they were like, oh no, I got to get out of this real quick. And so they had to do something in order to save money, but it turns out that was actually not legal, and so it was, kind of a reaction, not necessarily a premeditated act of manipulation, and then I think you have now, especially today, I still can't get into the mentality of the traders who are like, I have a premeditated plan of manipulation that I want to put into place and think they're not going to get caught. Like, I really do not understand that, because if they, I know what our systems are capable of identifying and how powerful that is. I can only imagine what some of the exchanges and some of the other people have too, that they built in-house over time with many, many hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars that they're putting into those systems. You are likely going to get caught with whatever it is that you're trying to do.
That's a serious message from an ex-regulator. That's quite scary. Where do you see the market going for you guys? Obviously, you've got state-of-the-art, industry-leading models. How do you stay on top?
Yeah, it's a constant battle, and it's really a combination of always monitoring what the regulators are talking about. It could be at conferences. It can be through their regulatory releases that they're putting out there, their regulatory notices and cases, always staying on top of that information, but then also getting the intel from the customers. And that's one of the advantages that we have, is that we will have a series of customers that can come to us and say, we're getting some inquiries about this type of behavior. And then what we can do is take that intel, we can either, adjust or design a new surveillance for that activity, and then we can put that out to all of our users. And then they get to essentially reap the benefits of that feedback we get from our customers. So it's almost like a communal situation. And that happens, it happens pretty consistently.
And what sort of market activity? So in the good old days, you could do stuff like the LIBOR submissions is all OTC and done in Bloomberg and then executed in the market so you can get it from both ways. Where are the modern day manipulations? How's the market changed over the last 5-6 years in terms of activities you're looking for?
Yeah, I would say that one of the big areas that I feel is ripe for manipulation is cross-product manipulation.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a couple of reasons for that. The first is that you're asking the regulators to go across jurisdiction to find something, and that's really difficult. So you need like CME to talk to ICE, you need the CFTC to potentially talk to FINRA, you need this, and anytime they need to do that kind of information sharing, there can just be delays, or they just don't share information with each other, and that's kind of a little gap that maybe it is kind of exposed there for people who want to take advantage of that. Even though I don't think that that's still as much the case as it was maybe 5 or 10 years ago. I think those gaps are closing. But then it's also the actual detection of it too, because now you're not just looking in a single order book or a single security. You're looking across multiple things like a future versus a physical, or a future versus an option on future, or an equity versus an ETF. Okay. And now you have to figure out, okay, well, what were these correlated? To what degree were these correlated? And then also, could the orders in one of these products actually influence other market participants in that other product? So there's a lot more that goes into identifying this. My suggestion to people is cast a wide net, find as much as you possibly think you can be finding, and then narrow it down from there. And you may have some false positives, but you're going to have to go through that exercise and say, oh, these weren't that correlated. Oh, these traders didn't know each other's positions or don't even know who each other are. There's no e-coms between these people. And you have to go through that. And so it becomes much more labor intensive review than just a single product.
Now, the other exciting thing for TT is you've spent the last year or so going cross product, right? When we first met, equities and that sort of thing was a distant pipe dream, and now it's a reality, right? You can do multiple asset classes, multiple jurisdictions, as well as crypto, which for me is about as rubbish as AI, but let that not poison it. Talk to me about market manipulation in crypto.
Yeah, I mean, it's I guess, and to a certain extent, like there's probably platforms, like a Coinbase. I know for a fact that they supervise their market, very diligently. I don't think that that's probably the case for most of the markets out there. And I think, or crypto markets out there potentially. And I think that is a risk that somebody who trades in that asset class is going to have to kind of just take. I mean, is there spoofing? Probably. Are there people probably pumping up fake liquidity? Absolutely. And it's not necessarily they are not up to the same standards and requirements that futures and equities and other asset classes are. So, and that could be the same for some of these. Even FX is a notoriously kind of like a loosely regulated type of an environment. There, they do have a code of conduct, but it's not the same as futures and equities. But then fixed income, that has become more regulated. That has become more of a focus of the regulators recently. And I anticipate eventually so will crypto. It's just taking more time.
And in that environment, you are selling to the crypto funds that are trading probably dollars into various shit coins and crypto and this, that, and the other. And because they got a fiduciary duty to their investors, because that bit is regulated.
Yes.
Therefore, they have to be careful on the other side of it, right?
That's right. And that's the absolutely, like you say, it's a duty to, it's you still, in my opinion, from a regulatory perspective, you absolutely have to have standards and processes and the surveillance and all the same things for any asset class you're trading. If you're not doing it now, be prepared in about 5 years to start getting some really difficult questions about why you weren't doing it back then. And you are still absolutely going to face regulatory issues.
Yeah, it's always backward looking regulatory stuff. People send emails and go, well, I never expect the regulator to look at that. Well, they look at it with hindsight, and hindsight's a horrible thing to have your words reviewed or your actions reviewed. And I think you're right. A lot of people, it fades into the background. It's like lighting in the movies. It's just there. It's your TT screen. You're away clicking and trading. And 3 years' time, they look at it and go, well, obviously you were being manipulative.
Yep. And good luck trying to remember that back then too, right? So you're better off having the right systems in place at the beginning.
Yeah. So talk me through how you service all of your customers, because effectively you're a magic screwdriver to the TT trading thing. I'm sure there's got to be much more to it than just, yeah, you're turned on. But how are you maintaining all of that stuff? Because the maths alone on that data has got to be enormous.
Oh yeah. So it is, from an onboarding perspective, we're very fast, right? So we can turn people with TT data on very quickly, and exchange drop, copy feeds, and file uploads. That stuff, it can take days, weeks at the longer end, weeks. But usually we're very, very efficient with getting the data in. But that's when the challenges or the real work begins. The data's in, okay? We know it's in there now. We're going to train you on what all these various different surveillances look for. We're going to look at some of your results together. We're going to analyze them. We're going to show you how you use our help library in combination with the alerts to figure out what is going on in here and how you make your dispositions. But then now we added in these configurable models, and we go through with them and we show them, here's how you configure the parameters. And then we will answer questions and say, oh, okay, if you want to, get a little bit a wider parameter here, that'll generate some more alerts for you. And it's also some more of almost like a new task for support we had before we only have had these configurable models for about a year now. So it's added in another layer of training and support that we now have. And as a result, we've grown our team to handle that addition.
And when you're doing all of the maths, what's your nightmare client? Is it a high frequency trader, I guess, because they're generating so much data, or is it people that trade sporadically over time and you've got really big clusters that are what's a good shaped client for you in terms of your tech setup?
I would say, different customers come with different challenges, right? So the high frequency, yes, data volumes are absolutely going to generate a lot of alerts. But our scoring system really comes into play there, and that's where we're going to keep that noise kind of down to a reasonable level, even if you're sending in millions of messages a month. And part of that too is the automated trading. It's a little bit different, I would say, from a manipulation standpoint. You're not going to find the same type of click trading spoofing patterns as you do in that data, right? So, it's almost kind of in a way, once their data's in, there's a little less digging in that you have to do almost. It's almost like because their algos are already doing what they do, and they have to explain how those algos work to the regulator. So it's hard to, you're not going to see them putting in, this is our spoof algorithm. You know what I mean? In the code. Right. Yeah. Like we're going to cancel before it's anyway. So it's a kind of a different thing, but the challenges there, I think, are the volume of the data and just the volume of alerts. But then the challenge for a click trader firm or a manual trading firm is just, they're trading so many different products, and it's very hard to find those needles in the haystack, where that manual trader is like, oh, well, I'm going to try to do something here that's a little bit different. That's where the risk lies for them, because why are they straying from what they typically do or what they've been agreed upon to do in the markets. And now they're starting to see this activity pop up.
And in terms of the system, it's a sort of backward looking one, right? You're always 15, 20 minutes, one day away from the action. It's not I'm doing this trade. No, you can't because you've hit a limit or it looks suspicious or whatever. You're effectively taking the record, looking at the tape, comparing the tape against the market, order books, and then prognosticating on that, right? It's stop, you can't do this stuff.
Yeah, there's no, there are other areas of the TT platform have the pre-trade risk controls, so they'll have the our algo Auto Spreader has various different controls they can put in place. And there's risk limits and stuff. So you do have that on the TT platform. But our tool is pure post-trade analysis.
And something you mentioned earlier, which stuck in my ear, is you, as a US regulator, split out e-communications and v-communications. Do you see them as two separate issues? It was just because in Europe it's sort of, electronic communications, because it's everything.
I did at the time when I was doing it, because we didn't have transcription all the time. So I would literally have to go listen to the VComs and try to interpret what that was saying, right?
You can never hear some of that cool
That's right. Stuff. So in my mind, they're still different, because you got the EComs, you're reading the emails, the IMs and stuff, but then on the VComs, you're loading up the tapes and trying to figure out what it was that was being discussed. So, but now today, as with your tool, I know you can transcribe everything, even if it's in a foreign language, and you're getting this amazing output, making everybody's lives so much better than they were back when I had to do it. So
I used to run IT for hedge funds, and meeting people in the corridor whose emails you'd had to randomly review or calls you'd had to randomly listen to. It's awkward, right? Just on a human level, it's very, very awkward as a compliance officer or as an IT related to compliance to do the job on a human level, because you can't unsee things, you can't unknow things. And for me, this is the best bit about where the market's going. In the old days, it was random sample. You dip into stuff, listen to some calls, look at some bloomies, break into WhatsApp and download the data off the unencrypted APIs, as it seems you can do with some archiving vendors. But you'd be reading stuff. It would be a total time suck, total waste of time, because you never find anything.
Yep.
And products now, such as yours, in terms of the clusters and the models and the rest of it, you're only highlighting things that need looking at, because effectively everything else is there. So we reckon in our little corner of the world where we're doing e-coms and v-coms, we're saving compliance staff 80 to 90% of their wasted time. I can only just imagine how much time you guys are saving. Have you ever done the figures on that? Because it must be...
We never have done a figure, but I will tell you that I have every customer that I've spoken to who used a different system that has moved over to our system. And that is one of I would say the top things, because not only do we save them the onboarding time and the parameter calibration time if they're using the machine learning and things like that, then we're also pinpointing the risk for them instantly with the scoring system.
Yeah.
And having been somebody who experienced the other way, we're talking about people that are going through hundreds, maybe thousands of alerts that are all equivalent essentially in their eye, and having to go through each one. It just becomes a data clearing action. It just becomes an alert clearing exercise. And that's almost worse than anything else, because they're not even paying attention sometimes because they can't get through a day of reviews. So there's no doubt in my mind that this is the direction of the way trade surveillance and other surveillance will be done in the future. But it's just kind of like baby steps to get there and to get people to realize the advantages of different, technology and stuff like that.
Yeah. And the other thing, again, that I like about the automation is it's not necessarily de-skilling it, but there's a huge ramp up. In the old days, if you were doing market supervision, you probably had to have been a trader, or else you didn't know.
Yeah.
There was no way that you, as a compliance officer, could sit there, read the tape and go, aha, they're slamming the close, they're whatever they're doing.
That's right.
Because you were never a trader. You didn't know. You couldn't know, because you were always the compliance Dr. No in the background. But with the tools that we have now, bringing people on into compliance is so much easier, because you don't need that huge step of being an ex-regulator, being a trader. You can say, as a senior compliance person, we've tuned the parameters are tuned for us. Anything above 90, have a look at. If it's over 95, you can deal with it, because we're certain that you can do it. And all of a sudden, you've got compliance being able to bring juniors on, bring people into what is an incredibly technical job, and make them useful.
Yeah.
So your utilization of your resources and the rest of it, and therefore your compliance is better.
Absolutely. And that, I think what you're hitting on there too, James, is so important. Like some of these, most firms are very lean on compliance resources. And there's so much more to do than just trade surveillance and electronic communication surveillance. That's one part of the job.
Yeah.
People, I think that's part of the challenge that I think people run into is like, well, I also have to do all my policies and procedures. I also have to understand what is happening in the trading firm and all these, AML and different areas of responsibility. And so, yes, I think at this point, the systems have to become more efficient. They have to in order for people to actually be able to get their job done, basically.
And we're helping.
That's right. Well, we're not going to replace them. But I think that's when people see things, machine learning and AI, they're like, well, I don't want my job replaced. But here's the fact. Trading is more complicated and complex, and you're trading all these different assets. You have all these different areas of responsibility that you need to supervise. You need to have tools that bring efficiency to make you better at your job, not to replace your job. That's,
you see, as a European and being decidedly more cynical than you, Jay, I would say you can't put a computer in jail. The regulator needs a person to hold accountable and tell off and walk out of the building and put all over the papers, because that's a person, right? You do that to a computer and it's like, nah, whatever. Computer said no. But you need the people. And I think the people's responsibility has gone up because trading volume's gone up, e-com's volume's gone up, AML rules are everywhere. You've got to make sure you're not selling 10-year term products to 90-year-olds accidentally and the rest of it, because you go to jail.
Yeah.
And using the automation, using the efficiency, using the fact that you can outsource the process to the machine, but still remain responsible for it.
That's right.
It's an augmentation technology, not a replacement technology. And I think that's really important in all of these things, that the idea isn't about detection. All of the systems, detection, reduction of false positives, all of that good stuff, tick, 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 tick. But actually the real thing to me is the people aren't going away because the regulator needs somebody to go to jail. So those people need to do more with less.
Yep.
And unless your system can help them do more with less, you're dead in the water.
I agree.
There we go. So we've got a couple of minutes left.
Yeah.
Is there anything we need to know about TT? Are you launching anything at the moment? Is there anything in Europe that you're focusing on that you'd like to leave everybody with?
I think I would say, in Europe in particular, one of the big requirements is real-time monitoring of algorithms. That was not something we could provide to people in the past, but we can now. And then also position limits. We're doing more with position limits reporting and monitoring. And I just really encourage people who, are using multiple different systems for things, be it like I have my real-time system, I have my T+1 system, and I have my position limit system, and then an e-com system, and you got all these different systems. And we'd be maybe an attractive, offering where we're combining a lot of those things into a single system for them to achieve all those MiFID II and MAR requirements. So.
Perfect. Yeah. Well, we've just come up on the hour. Jay, thank you so much for your time. It's amazing. I'm always blown away whenever I even venture onto your website. I feel like an IT pygmy after everything that you guys have done, because it's really quite impressive. So thank you very much indeed for your time.
And thank you, James. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it. Yep.
There will be another compliance catch up in a month. We've got some exciting guests coming up in terms of AR's principles and how the compliance market is working. But for now, thank you very much indeed. See you all soon.